of that has already begun with the training of individuals within our buildings to be able to support students, identifying it when need be, understanding what it means, and putting up some clear expectations of what our classroom behaviors and expectations are with ourselves and others.
May I interrupt for a second? Just want to make a little announcement. We've been dealing with some computer issues with the live stream of the broadcast. Unfortunately, it's not on our end, or we'd be able to fix it. It's on the end of the provider that does the streaming for us. So we are switching to YouTube, and the link for the YouTube streaming will be on the district homepage, and our communications office is putting out an email. So if you're watching this and you're able to watch this, I just want to let you know that we're going to cut over to the YouTube stream any minute now, and that will hopefully resolve the problems that we're experiencing.
Are there any more questions? Okay. All right. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And now I'll just summarize the presentation, having made my little announcement. I just want to circle back to some things that were asked by board members and kind of tie them all together. So clearly we hear the board's focus, and more importantly, we see the board's investment in the mental health of our young people. When I was at Nassau BOCES now 9 years ago, I was testifying before a state body, and I told them that we could triple the number of resources that we had for mental health supports for kids and still not clear the waiting list. So I think I've been proud of the work that we've done here at Syosset. I've been appreciative of the investments the board has made, and I feel like our trajectory is good. And the obligation that is on us as a leadership team is to make sure that we maximize the benefit of those investments. So one of the reasons for doing the 6-day rotation was to create this time for more proactive lessons. We redesigned our code of conduct several years ago to incorporate restorative practices. Obviously, that took a little bit of a backseat during the pandemic. It's work that we want to get back to and work we need to get back to. And really what we're trying to do by being more systematic and thoughtful about how we collect data, record data, hand data off between teachers and between buildings is to make sure that we maximize all of these investments by not having them end after they're implemented and then no longer needed, but they inform the work that the subsequent teacher will do with a child so that they can do their best work with them. So building this system behind the scenes, and Mr. Ostrick, I appreciate your comment about how we were trying to summarize a lot of complexity into a brief period of time. But hopefully we will execute well on this, and you'll see the benefit of those investments in reduced stress and more enjoyment of school, better tailoring of instruction to individual students, both their needs and their aptitudes. So that's all of that is at the other end of this process. And so, again, I'm proud of the work that the team has done. I'm proud when I hear compliments from colleagues of the work that we've done. And we feel like we've started and we've got more work to do.
Thank you. Superintendent's report.
So we're going to switch presentations while we're doing the switching of the PowerPoint presentations. I'm sure that in the community, top of mind has been the issue of coach buses, because as Ms. Chang mentioned earlier, we're keeping the Farmingdale community in our thoughts. And Syosset is fortunate in that our students participate in lots of things, and that often means that they have to travel. What we do, we work very hard to try and plan out as much of our year's worth of travel in advance as we possibly can, because what that means is that we get to reserve buses while there's lots of availability from our preferred providers. So many of the trips that we make are annual trips. We know where we're going, we know what we're doing, and we're able to reserve our buses well in advance. Where we find ourselves with some challenges is when we have unexpected trips, which are usually happy things because our students have won some kind of a local competition and they get to go to a regional competition or maybe even a national competition. It may mean that we need to get them to some out-of-state place. It may mean that they may fly to some out-of-state place and then need some shuttle transportation on the ground. So we work very hard to secure good transportation when we do that. The shuttle transportation is generally not high-speed transportation. So even though it's out of town, it's not as concerning as the highway transportation. But there's a process and an algorithm that we go through here. Every trip, the buses must be inspected before the trip by the company. The driver has to sign off and attest that that pre-trip inspection has occurred. We have a checklist that occurs at the building level on the day of the trip. And if anything on the checklist is improper, the trip doesn't occur. So we're checking at the district level, the driver abstracts, their license, their experience as a driver. And we check the map, the route. We checked the insurance, the registration to make sure everything is up to date. The inspection stickers have to be up to date. And then the drivers have to verbally give students emergency procedures. And all of that has to take place before the buses are allowed to leave. So there are two ways that districts can procure these kinds of buses. One is by piggybacking on a bid. There's a bid that many districts piggyback on, actually an RFP from a nearby school district. And then there's the ability to go through Nassau BOCES. The Nassau BOCES bid is a little more challenging to use because it's stratified by length of trip. And so you end up using a different provider depending on the trip length. And it's a little bit more expensive. But there are always reasons to go through and review our practices. We're certainly taking this as an opportunity to go through and review our practices. I don't know anything more than what I've read in the paper about what happened last week. But once more is known, we'll certainly incorporate that into the planning that we do. But I want to reassure parents that this is something we've given a lot of thought to and a lot of focus, and we're certainly being attentive in the current moment. With that said, I'll go to something cheerier to talk about, which is the ongoing conversation with the board about school facilities. And at our last board meeting, the board gave us, I think, some very clear direction on where your priorities lie. We've tried to summarize that more in the form of a plan and reply to your conversation and make sure that we've gotten it right in terms of synthesizing and summarizing the conversation from last month. And then there are just some areas where I hope in this month's conversation we'll be able to take some direction from you and have a sense of how you'd like to move forward. So with that said, so at the last meeting, we had a lengthy conversation about the Woodbury School. I've certainly heard lots of creative ideas from board members about how we could make that space useful to the district and to the community. We did some brainstorming. One of the challenges of using it for strictly office space would be that it doesn't generate state building aid. And if we can find some instructional spaces to use in that building, it would generate the aid and obviously defray some of the cost of reconstruction. So we thought of an instructional use being perhaps a small pre-K program for some needy learners. There's certainly a need for these kinds of spaces in the community. And what it would do is would give us a glimpse into these learners' profiles before they reach kindergarten. It would allow us to serve them even better when they arrived at kindergarten because they'd be part of our system early on. There is a space, I described it to the board last month as a half gym. I think half gym was probably still too generous. It's probably about 25 feet by 35 feet. So think much larger than a conference room, much smaller than a gym. So a little bit less than half of a volleyball court, if you can picture that space in your mind. But a space like that is generous enough to do pre-K level physical education, occupational therapy, physical therapy would be useful for that. And then in the evenings, it would lend itself to adult education, which is also aidable for state purposes, or community uses. It would be yet another space that the community would have access to. And it'd have the advantage of not being a whole school building. So it'd be easier to give a group the use of that space. Again, even if there was pre-K in the building, there wouldn't be gym in there every moment of the day. And so that might be space that would be useful for holding district-wide meetings, getting teachers together to work on professional development. And then again, our proposal to the board is to free up some space in this building by relocating offices that are currently here because we do anticipate enrollment growth in this building in the not too distant future. So at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about the site plan at HPT. This is a conceptual drawing, but just I find that I'm a visual learner, and so therefore I assume everyone is. But I do think it's helpful to at least see how the campus would lay out. We'd propose to sort of, based on your conversation last month, to moderate the amount of cost of the creation of a track here by locating it closer to the service road side of the campus and leaving the existing football field undisturbed. We'd call that a practice field in the future. It'd be possible to put a soccer field in the outfield of where the baseball diamond is now. And at some point, and we just drew it on here so you could see how the scale fits. At some point, we are going to have to resurface the 4 existing tennis courts. And if you were ever going to add additional courts there, that would be the time to do it because you'd save a lot of money on the mobilization costs of just doing it once instead of doing it more than once. So you could squeeze as many as 3 more courts in, not necessarily, that would be up to the board to decide how much you wanted to put there. But I did want to share what the layout would look like. Also at last month's meeting, you asked us to keep a placeholder for Berry Hill. The campus there, the topography of the campus, the narrowness of the top part of the campus presents quite a challenge from a construction perspective. So we've had our team, and the team is here in the audience tonight if the board have questions. The team has been working on this. They've been consulting with a modular building construction company for some ideas for how to approach this. And I do think we've hit on a general strategy for how we would go about doing the replacement of the portables on this campus, but I'm not confident in our cost estimates yet to make those public. I think we have some work to do interrogating the numbers a little bit more. And in this drawing, you see a drawing that has the concept of 3 new classrooms at the level of the current hallways, so all one building. And then what we would do is create 3 classrooms below that. So that would be at grade with the playground area, which is down a fairly steep hill. So that would have the advantage of creating 6 classrooms, but that doesn't generate any more classroom space. I think we would need to create a little bit more than 6. And it does have the advantage of making the playground, which is currently not very accessible to someone who has mobility issues. It would make it perfectly accessible by being able to exit out the first, we'll call it floor 0. If everything else is the first floor, we would have a floor 0 underneath that. So that would give us accessibility to the playground for any student that had mobility issues. So we would then, and the blue part is the current portables. They would eventually be demoed. And if the board ever wanted to put more of a large space, that would probably be the location where that large space would go at some point in the future. The advantage of this plan by building at a different part of the building is that you could be working on construction in one location and you don't have to demo the portables until after you're ready to open the new construction. But again, this would, I don't want to minimize the complication, how complex that construction project would be. So lastly, this is our attempt at summarizing the conversation from last month. I think in my own mind, I was using the term layers and saying there was one layer that was sort of a given. That's the $49 million in health and safety work that was identified through the annual visual inspection. The board then talked about several things that fit into a safety, security, and wellness kind of a bucket. And that was the vestibule at HPT because it's a visitor screening area and a way of controlling the flow of students both during arrival and at dismissal. The bus loop at the high school, which speeds up the busing dismissal at the high school and therefore makes dismissal go more smoothly at all the buildings. And that has certainly a safety aspect to it. And then lastly, the guidance suite at the high school. And I heard Ms. Goldthwait refer back to that when asked what her long-term goals would be. She talked about spaces where access to services are destigmatized. And that's certainly what the suite would do. It would create the opportunity to move robotics into a better space as well. So there'd be a knock-on benefit to pursuing that. The next thing the board talked about as a priority is the replacement of the portables. I think we need some direction from the board in terms of how you want us to approach that, how comprehensive you want the changes to be at the campuses, whether you want us to break it into one phase or two. But the cost of just replacing the portables themselves, and again, this doesn't include a firm number for Berry Hill. This is more of a square foot driven number for Berry Hill. Then the next layer is the management of our enrollment growth. So we know that the enrollment growth is coming. We already know that it's in the elementary schools. It will reach the secondary schools soon. So in Southwoods, as I mentioned, the idea would be to relocate some offices that are currently in what used to be classrooms and convert those back to classrooms. The cost for that, I'm holding in a column called district because we think we can do that with district staff. For the high school, the proposal would be to build a new library inside a courtyard and then take the existing library and convert it back into classrooms. Again, that'd be about 5 classrooms. Again, the conversion of the classrooms is something that we would be able to do ourselves. And so really the only cost, not the only cost, a significant cost, but the cost would be contracting out the construction of the new library. Since that cost is roughly the same as creating 5 classrooms from scratch, it seems like this is the better way to go because you get a new large group space out of it that will be something that stays with the building for the long haul. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the board had a lot of creative ideas about the Woodbury School. We went back and asked our team to find ways that they could economize in how we would do the reconstruction there to see if we could do some cost containment. I think we did a good job with that. And so we're feeling more confident about this number. And then lastly, the HBT track project, stripped of everything else and just having it be a track would be about $1.9 million, and creating a structure halfway between a dome, an air supported dome and an actual cinder block building would be supported fabric structure. I'm picturing the one SUNY Stony Brook just built one out for its athletic complex. So for the size that it's much larger than the one that we're thinking of, but for the size that we're thinking of, it'd be somewhere in the neighborhood of $8.7 million. And again, the challenge there is as the high school grows, we're already very constrained on gym space at the high school, so much so that we rent a lot of space elsewhere in the community. And so that just creates more opportunities for students by having more space for the young people that we have. And then lastly, I just want to draw the board's attention to some news that I brought back from the conference I was at this weekend. I was listening to a panel of legislators talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and the possibility that there are grant funds in there to deal with climate related concerns. So certainly I think about this in terms of air conditioning large spaces like gyms and buildings or cafeterias. So we're looking into this. I have not seen any communications from the feds, from the federal government yet on this, but we'd like to explore that because it seems consistent with some of the goals that the board has had. And if there are resources out there that we can draw down for this, obviously it'll defray the costs that we have to support locally. So that's our summary of the board's work from the last meeting. And an opportunity for us to make sure that we got it right. And if not, make some adjustments, and also to take some direction from the board on some of the open items that are still there for us.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Ms. Falco?
There you go. Thank you. This was great. It really broke it down in a way that was easy to understand. Of the total money that's on that chart, we don't have any idea how much we would get back from the state, or any kind of idea how much we get back. And so that's the first question. And then my other question is, when you get that money back from the state, is there any guidance or regulation on what that money, like where that money goes? Like, can you earmark that money, for example, to future facility projects, so that if you, let's say, you're spending $100 million and then we get back $40 million, can we then use that $40 million for other, like for future facility projects? Or does that have to go back into the general pot per se, and then would have to get assigned?
Yeah, it's a great question. The team has been talking about how much of this would be reimbursable. So the state will reimburse instructional spaces. They won't reimburse non-instructional spaces. There is an art to designing construction in a way to maximize state aid. But even when you do that, the general number that we've been batting around is 85%. So 15% of the space typically is not aidable space, because you just have to have administrative space to run a building. So to become more refined in those numbers, we would have to go through the process of actually creating detailed drawings. So I don't know that I'm going to be able to pinpoint a better number than 85, but for ballpark purposes, no, 85% of the project cost. So let's say there's $10 million worth of construction, maybe 8.5 million of it would be aidable. And of that 8.5 million, you would get 42% aid on the 8.5 million. So that would leave you with 300 and something, I'm sorry, 3 million and change in state aid. To the second half of the question, how does the aid come in? Is it a lump? And then can we turn around and spend that lump on more facilities? So a better way to think of how this works is to think about a mortgage payment. So the state will reimburse us in the year following the year in which we make a payment. So we won't ever have a big lump sum payment that we make that comes with a big lump sum state aid afterwards. In fact, even if we tried to do that, the state wouldn't pay us that way. The state will say, we're going to pay you as though you mortgaged it, and we're going to pay you every year for 20 years. Even if you paid it all up at once, we're going to give it to you over time, because the state is managing its own cash flow. So what will actually happen is, at some point, we'll do a lot of small borrowings to get the project started so we can pay our contractors. And then we'll issue a bigger borrowing and refund the small borrowings, refinance them essentially. And then that bigger borrowing, we will not be able to borrow more than we can demonstrate that we can spend. So we can't borrow a lot of money, even if we know we'll need it eventually. We can only borrow what we're using at the time, and then we get back the money in the next year. So to make it easy, let's say it's $10 million and it's $1 million a year to pay it back. Not that that's right, but just go with me because I can do that math in my head. Then we would get $400,000 back from the state. So for every year's $1 million mortgage payment, the next year we would get $400,000 back from the state. But what we would use that for is to make it so that we only had to put $600,000 on the tax base. So it doesn't sit as a lump sum. What it does is decrease the amount that we have to go out and tax for. So at the end of the project, you haven't accumulated all of this aid. What you've done is you've decreased the cost each and every year. So the first year is a little bit of a struggle because you don't get the state aid until the next year. but usually the first year is a ramp up. So there isn't some big lump sum payment in that first year. And again, we work with our bond counsel and the architects to try and plan all of that so that there never is a spike at the district, because that spike would be seen in the tax rate.
So since there's a lag with the state on when they pay, is it likely that their payments will go on longer than, I guess, in what we do, or they'll probably coincide so that we won't be getting payments back from them longer than we are paying off the bonds or whatever it is?
So there are different borrowing periods depending on what type of construction we're doing. So new construction might have a 20-year bond period. Other kinds of construction have shorter bond periods. And then the state has this, what they call an assumed amortization. So they are assuming that you're borrowing over a certain period of time, even if that's not the period of time. So it may be that there's a soft spot in the bond market, and we say we'd rather do a 15-year borrowing than a 20 or something like that. So it's possible that the state says, for this, we're on an assumed amortization of 20 years, even if you decided to do 15 years. That may still be in our best interest because we minimize an interest cost, no pun intended. But that would be a situation where the state might still be paying us out for 5 more years because we retired our bond early, but they're paying on the assumed amortization. So again, a lot of what we do is by we, I mean Dr. Rufo. What Dr. Rufo does behind the scenes is try to time all of these bond anticipation notes, the small borrowings that lead up to the bigger borrowing, and then work with bond counsel so that we don't see any dramatic like sawing of the amount of debt service that we have in any one year. And that, again, there is an art to that.
Ms. Abramson?
Hi, thank you. Can we just look at the Berry Hill portable replacement for 1 second? I just want to make sure I'm understanding the concept. You're building portables on the bottom level when the school's at the top level? Is it my?
So on the left side of the diagram here, surrounded by a yellow box to just make it stand out. That doesn't exist right now. That's what would be built. So that's a 2-story building. So instead of it being a 2-story up building, it's a 2-story down building, if that makes sense. So the top floor of this 2-story building is going to be level with the existing Berry Hill School. And the bottom floor of this 2-story building will be down because it's at the bottom of the hill that's there at Berry Hill. Does that describe it better than what I did the last time around?
Yeah. And that was concerning to me, but that makes more sense because now I can see a kind of a hallway, right? Okay.
Now that we're not replacing the existing portable, and we are actually building on a different site, timing is not as urgent since we're not getting rid of it and the portables can stay. I know the prefab is a better way to go in terms of timing, and we can take care of it during the summer. But is building a regular construction an option since it's going to be a new construction in that area?
So I will give you the high level overview, but then I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bellato from H2M to kind of describe the idea that we're working with right now. And again, this is preliminary. We're proposing to use modular construction in this location. But in order to prepare this site for the modulars, we would have to do some excavation of the hillside, creation of a retaining wall, pouring of a slab on which all of this would go, and then the modular pieces would go on top of that site work once the site work was completed. In order to put the modulars on there, there's not enough room to move them around the side of the building because it's too close to the property line. So the modulars would have to be craned over the top of the building. So I actually think that, this is my opinion, but again, we'll have our architects tell us. If we were to construct on that site, we would have to take materials over the building for a much longer period of time. Whereas with the modulars, we would just have to do a lift once. We could do all the lifting over the building in the summer and never have to be overhead any other time of the year. That's optimal for lots of reasons. So and the whole process might take 5 or 6 months, where all of the lifting and the construction of the placement of the modulars would occur during summer months when the building is closed and there's no one in the building underneath where the lifting is taking place. So we're talking with a modular construction company about how we would accomplish this. It's fairly complicated. Megan, do you want to take a swing at a little more detail? And if you say I'm wrong, that's fine, but just explain why.
No, you're not wrong. I think you pictured it pretty accurately. The reason you would do the prefab versus traditional construction, you're saving the time. So you're getting your building up and running faster with the prefab versus the traditional construction. So you're saving time with the prefab versus traditional construction. Yes, that's one of the only things with prefab. You have the ability to get that building up and running faster than you would if you did traditional construction, where you're going to have almost more than double the construction time for traditional construction versus prefab. So you're able to prep the site during the school year. And then once school ends, you have, as Dr. Rogers says, the crane come in and drop your prefab unit. And the way that they describe it is the walls kind of just fall down and come into place. And all of the electrics there, you just have to hook it up. All the walls are there and everything's ready to go. So it expedites the construction process. And that's the real benefit of the prefab buildings.
So let's say I understand the prefab is the way to go, and that's going to be faster, easier, done well. If we were to do it with the regular construction, well, are we talking about 2 summers? So instead of starting maybe 2024 fall, we'll do 2025 fall.
With traditional construction, you could be up to 2 years in construction doing those new classrooms or more.
And my worry would be getting heavy construction materials on site, pallets of cinder blocks and things like that. They will not be easy to get around the side of the building. So we would do it on weekends and things like that, but there'll be a lot of cost associated with overtime for doing all your crane lifts on the weekends when the building's empty. I do think it would be a very complicated process to try and build behind the school while school is in session.
You also have noisy hours too that you would want to consider when classes are in session. There's a certain amount of work that you wouldn't be able to do. So you would be paying a premium, like Dr. Rogers said, for certain work that would be happening.
And just thank you, Megan, for that, because you reminded me when we were building the fitness center at the high school, there were days when we had to close the blinds to a lot of the classrooms that were facing the fitness center because they were doing welding. And, kids in the classroom are not wearing welding masks. So you didn't want anybody looking at the welding while it was going on because you didn't want to have eye injuries. So that we would have that problem as well. If we were doing a steel infrastructure, we would be welding behind the school, and it's a lot of complexity.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Rutolo.
So since it would go up quicker and now we're not using 2 summers, would we then end up saving construction cost and also on waste? Because obviously now if it's prefabricated, we're not paying for these materials that then get thrown out.
The benefit you get from prefabricated is time. Everything is for the most part, everything's constructed off site. The prep can be quicker for the site. This way, not to reiterate what everybody's saying, but most of that work is done offsite. So therefore, it's not a distraction, not a disruption to the school. And then it could just, at the right time, come in, be dropped. So the cost isn't really the saving. There isn't much savings with the cost, if any, because what you're saving is time. So the only difference is that time that you have. And it depends also the materials that you're using. Obviously, you want more durable materials. That comes at a premium as well, which is cost just as regular typical construction is. So cost wise, I would say you can't use it as a factor. It's just saving that disruption time. It's still, there's still prevailing wage that's involved. There's still, transport. There's other factors that go into that. So the materials are basically the same. And when you think about modular construction, depending on the type of construction that you use, for example, masonry, you can do prefabricated masonry structures, but that comes at a premium because you now have to reinforce that considerably more than if you did it in place, because with the travel and the movement, it has to be reinforced a little bit more. So again, because of the type of construction and the travel and the logistics of it, there is a little more to it than just building it on site.
1 second. I know there are a lot of questions and I'll try my best to get to everyone. The next in line will be Mr. Greco.
Unfortunately, I have a lot of questions, and maybe what we should do is try to organize this where I'll ask you questions, or we'll ask questions more on the facts and what you've presented, and maybe we can talk about the process afterwards. And one of the things that jumped out at me when you mentioned in your last slide the possibility of air conditioning is the layer that deals with portables. We're looking at either replacing portables in 2 schools, possibly 4 schools. And I'm wondering if there's anything we can address at all elementary schools. For example, like air conditioning in the gyms when it's as hot as it feels like it is in this room right now. I'm wondering if there's a way as part of the elementary layer that we can address more of the schools, with obviously putting the priority on Walt Whitman and Berry Hill because of the condition of those portables and the need for space. One of the other things I wouldn't mind hearing a little more about is the bus route, or the bus, I don't remember the term you used, behind the high school. It's my understanding that by opening up that lane, you have the ability to run another set of buses. And I think you refer to it as trickling down to all of the schools as a benefit of that. So it's not just connecting the road for the purpose of connecting the road for what appeared to be about $1 million. We'd have the ability to buy us flexibility and also benefit the middle schools and the elementary schools.
Yeah, so when the board considered air conditioning back in 2016, we presented the board with small, medium, and large, and the board chose medium plus. What does that mean? So the board decided to air condition every classroom plus the 3 secondary auditoriums and the main gym at the high school. So that was the air conditioning project. We looked at a project of air conditioning every last space in every last building, but that cost about twice as much. But the board in its various iterations and incarnations has definitely been looking at the larger assembly spaces in all the buildings, because obviously kids and staff are in those spaces, and they get hot too. So we can certainly look at that. We can certainly come up with some pricing for the board to consider in terms of what like an air condition, what it would cost to air condition a typical elementary sized gym. In terms of the bus loop behind the high school, the reason why I suggested it has a cascading benefit is because For dismissal at the high school right now, there's only enough room in the loop to stage a certain number of buses. And because of that, we actually run 3 different waves of buses in order to get through all of the dismissal. So there's a bunch of buses in the loop and the rest are sitting on the road waiting. We load those buses, they exit. Then it takes time for the next group of buses to pull in, stop, open the doors, the kids to get on the buses. They load, they close the doors, then that wave leaves. And then there's a third wave that's about half as large. So 2.5 waves to dismiss. We think that if we have the additional roadway behind the high school, it would give us 2 advantages. One, we think we could stage all of the buses in a single wave or get very close to it. So there wouldn't be this waiting to reload over and over every night. And then we would be able to exit some of the buses down Pell Lane onto Southwoods Road instead of having all of the buses try and squeeze out the exit in front of the high school. So you have a bottleneck in terms of the loop, you have a bottleneck in terms of the exit onto the road. So we're trying to alleviate some of those bottlenecks. If we get rid of the bottlenecks at the high school, which dismisses at 2:20, then by the time those buses get to the middle school, we haven't wasted 5-6 minutes on 6, maybe 7 minutes of time at the high school. It just gives us 6-7 minutes worth of additional work time. The buses are more likely to be on time for the middle school dismissals. If they're on time for middle school, they're more likely to be on time for the elementary dismissal. So we see that bottleneck at the very beginning. Whenever there's a problem at the high school, it cascades through all the other busing. This gives us just another much bigger tool to work with.
I had sort of a third question in there, but I didn't want to do them all in a row. The Woodbury School, the $8.5 million rehab, and obviously I'm all for rehabbing that school, but it's hard to figure out what that number means without seeing the benefit and what the cost would be to move that same number of staff into that building versus renting space. And it seems like a large number if all we're looking at is potentially having a pre-K there, which could help, of course, pay for it, and being able to move some, if not all, staff. So it would be helpful at some point to see some analysis. I know that's a big ask. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Well, let me make sure I understand where you're going with this. 3 things have changed since the last conversation we had. First, we refined the estimates and they're a little lower. Second, we've identified uses that might make some of that cost state aidable. And third, certainly heard the board last month working for ideas to make this a viable. It's property that you own and you're trying to find a way to make it viable. So what I'm hearing is now with the potential of aid, the refined cost, and the new uses that we've come up with, redo the exercise that we did for you a couple months ago, where it was trying to figure out where the break even is on renting space versus occupying space. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers. I just have a couple of questions on the chart that you have, just for clarity purposes. My first question is the guidance suite / robotics at Syosset High School. What's the projected time frame for that particular project? Do you think that's something that is doable over a summer period?
I'm going to defer to the folks from H2M to talk about that construction project.
Depending on how that is done, the intent would be to be a summer construction project. I don't know if part of that will be self-construct or part of that will be publicly bid, but the intent would be a summer construction project.
My next question for you is the 13.9 million for portable replacement. Is that, you said the number is just square foot driven. It's not, bells and whistles or whatever. It's just an idea. is that 13.9 million the Berry Hill that we're looking at? Or are we looking at other schools' portables being replaced in that 13.9 million?
So that was the estimate we gave you a couple of presentations ago. That was based on the 4 campuses that have portables, and it was just there are 3 at Village. What would it cost to replace those 3? And with each of these, we said we would add 1 classroom because the district has been experiencing growth. If you're going to have the construction team on site, you save the mobilization cost by creating 1 more classroom. So that's where that number came from. It was replace everything in kind plus 1. But it was not, let's look at each individual campus. We talked a little bit about more extensive renovation to Whitman. I haven't even given you a number on this more extensive renovation to Berry Hill yet. But so that 13.9 is the ballpark figure of just replacing in kind, which we already know is not possible, let's say at Berry Hill.
Okay, so then what we're seeing in this diagram, which is, fabulous for Berry Hill, but that number is going to really go up from that in order to do a project of that magnitude with 2 levels and whatnot.
No question.
The other thing I just want to ask you is the time frame for this. This is great that it's put into this. It's definitely easier to break it down this way. Is it possible? I know I asked this last time, but I'm going to ask it again. Is it possible then for us to put all of this together with the board's direction and get a vote in then the beginning of next year, get an early vote to possibly get the paperwork started and whatnot, because it's, to wait until May, I think is going to push the timeline even further back.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we're always working against the limited capacity that the state has. And we have 1 season when we can do our construction. So anything that maximizes our chances of getting in a summer saves you 12 months. And 12 months is not just the time, it's the cost escalation. We're looking at cost escalations in the 4 or 5% a year range. So that's saving that summer could mean saving 5% on the cost of the job. So I would, encourage the board to think as you're thinking about trying to make sure that you have enough time for your own deliberations and the community's deliberations, but also not to delay because we'll want to get our projects up to the state as quick as we possibly can.
Just one more thought to throw out there. The annual visual inspections, which is obviously the big nut of the cost. In my opinion, I would assume that we wouldn't want to just take on those projects first. It's almost like we have to figure out, this is great to organize it for us, but we have to figure out which projects to take on together. In other words, I don't know how everybody else feels about, but I don't think we'd want to just focus on the inspections, those projects that have to be done, and then move on to the next, because these kind of, in a way, I think we have to figure out how to organize it the best way, and then how to break down that cost as well. Because it's going to be done over a series of time. It's not going to be, it's not just 1 year and then all these things are going to get done over the summer. Obviously, it's going to be over a period of time. So there's no question there. I was just kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think most of this stuff will be bid. So it will be a question of how many contractors are available to do the work. And what the construction season looks like, and are we competing with other school districts for the contractors that exist? And those are all unknowns, but the team, our construction management team and our architecture firm, it's their job to kind of keep a sense of what's going on in the marketplace so that we make good decisions, don't take on too much work at the same time, but also don't delay because we don't want to see cost inflation.
Ms. Valkov?
So Lisa hit a lot of my questions. But just to add on a couple other things. So with the 13.9, so that's gonna go up with the Berry Hill prefab. I know that the prefab prices vary greatly depending on the materials that we pick. Is it possible when you price it out to give us different levels and to say, you know, if you do mid-level, this is what you get, and if, you know, so we could figure out what level we think makes the most sense, so that we could, you know where we want to go with that.
Absolutely. And the next time we come through, we'll have more refined estimates for Berry Hill and the other campuses, and we'll give you a range, sort of as we did before with the air conditioning, kind of a low, medium, high.
And then my other follow-up question to what Lisa actually asked was, so I think what she said is a really important point, that, you know, to group the different projects, because if you're on site at, you know, HPT doing the visual inspections, it would make sense to do, you know, the front part of it or the track or whatever, because you're there already. So I think that grouping it probably makes sense time-wise and money-wise and all that stuff. Do you have a general, I know you probably don't have the answer to this. I'll ask you anyway. And if you don't have the answer, I totally understand. Of how long, like how much of it you think we could get done, like the first, you know, year we're able to break ground? I mean, costs, you know, spreading out the cost, I guess, makes sense too, but, you know, figuring out how much we could get done and how fast, how many years it's going to take.
I'm going to turn to experts for that. I'm out of my depth on how much can be accomplished in 1 year.
So really the first step is to narrow down all the scope that is looking to be completed under the bond. And then what we do, also working with Elite, is we package all that. And so just to give you a very simple example, is putting together a re-roofing job and setting it up to SED. It's a lot quicker than putting a whole building addition together. So what we also have to do is figure out where we can kind of have that economy of time and put those projects together and get it permitted through SED, then get it bid out. So there's a timeline that goes along with that. And some projects will be a longer timeline than others. So we'll work on that as how we think will be the most efficient way. But also what we also don't want to do is disrupt one campus completely while we're handling as much as we can. So there also is a bit of a juggle of how much work we're doing at one campus at a time. And as Dr. Rogers stated, really the climate of the construction industry at the time also makes a big difference as well.
Of the projects are there a lot of things that would take place not in the summer?
Some of the visual inspection work, like roofing projects, we try to get done over spring break. So looking at that, maybe packaging those separately, getting them up to the state and getting them done to be able to be bid to do during April. So looking at those schedules and maybe bidding things out sooner. So as soon as summer comes, all the materials on site and they can hit the ground running. So looking at the bidding timeline of that as well, because we also need to make sure insurances are approved. So planning that schedule out properly is going to be key for getting all of that work done.
Dr. Rogers, I want to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're asking you to do. So the priority within any of these buckets, right? The AVI number and the time it would take to do any of the items in there. So, and the priority of the timing in which we do it. Is that something you want from us now, or are we really just trying to tell you, we want you to do all this? We need to go out for a bond to pay for all this, and it doesn't really matter. You and the experts will decide what gets done, when and how. We just try to figure out how much money we're really willing to spend on everything together. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something.
I think there are some choices to be made about the scope of work, and you've had some conversations about that, but that's really a decision that the board needs to make and give us some direction on in terms of the overall scope. In terms of how to sequence that, that's something that I would end up deferring to our architects and the folks from Elite Construction. Everyone will know that the mission is to construct as much as possible before inflation kicks in. But we will also not want to go so fast that we don't do a good job. And our job will be to calibrate that. And it may be that we can do multiple things on one campus at a time, or it may be that it's two different contractors and the two contractors there'll be conflict. So we might sequence them so that one contractor leaves the site before another arrives. So this was fairly complicated when we did the high school reconstruction, because contractor for the door project, contractor for the science rooms, contractor for the vestibule, contractor for the fitness center, working through all of that and trying to keep all of that together. It was doable, we got it done, but it presented some challenges. So we'll work through that, but really we defer to our construction managers, who are the ones that are going to be on site managing all these contractors for us, to give us a sense of what the best way is to do that.
So I've been listening carefully to the questions. So I have two thoughts. One is I have a couple of factual questions of my own, and then I have sort of process questions. And I think Brian is getting at a key point, but let me ask my factual question first, which is I don't see on here and I don't remember if it was part of our annual visual inspection or not, but there was talk of sidewalk and pavement, significant work that needed to be done at HBT in one of the 5 or 6 presentations or memos that sort of have iterated. It's not clear to me that that's in this number, this slide. Do you know off the top if it is?
It's part of the annual visual inspection number.
That it was like $4.5 million bucks.
Correct.
Okay, so that's in that.
It's rolled in with the annual visual inspection amount.
Okay, that's good to know. So sort of, again, coming back to Brian's point about process, right? I suppose there's really 3 dimensions to this problem, right? One is, in order for me to give a series of opinions and recommendations, I sort of have to understand what I'm optimizing to, right? One is, am I trying to give you a list of a certain number of projects, and after I get to that number of projects, then we stop, and whatever that costs is, and if the board agrees on those 15 projects, I just made up a number, that's what you're looking for, and we give you that list of projects, and that's the scope of work? Or are you looking for hey, here's a roundabout number, and here's a list of 72 things we'd like to get done, and this is the order in which we prioritize them, and you go as far as you can with that number. And if you can get through 16 of them, great. If you can get through 21 of them, great. So the priority that you are trying to elucidate from us is which of those two. And then I have a third sort of dimension, which is over what time frame should I be thinking about our strategic planning about this money? So in other words, is this a 4 to 6 year window, a 10-year window? So what am I optimizing my decisions around in terms of time?
All great questions. So in the end, there are all kinds of great ideas, and the board's going to have to make some decisions. I think, Mr. Ostrick, in the past, I've heard you use the word, sometimes the word is and sometimes the word is or. So we need a little bit of direction on how much and there is and how much or there is, or without any. So the second thing is, do you give us an outside number and say, here are all the things that we think are priorities, construct as much as you can, but we know the market may change and you might not be able to get to everything. The challenge with that is, first of all, we have to draw everything and send it up to the state. So we may have a lot of sunk costs in doing drawings and things that for projects that we might not be able to afford after all. The second thing is, I think it would be very hard to nuance with voters that we're asking you to come and vote for something without guaranteeing that we're then going to turn around and build it. So we may say, this is our priority number 20 out of 20. And if we get to it, we get to it. But that might be the reason somebody came and voted for it. And so if we didn't get to project 20, they might say, but you promised me that there was going to be a green slide and there's no green slide. What happened? So I think it's what school districts typically do is they try to be very realistic about the numbers and try to be very realistic about what they'll be able to construct so that when they're explaining the project prior to the vote, there's every confidence that everything that they say they're going to do is feasible. Things change, but generally speaking, we try to be pretty concrete about what we're doing, just so that we build confidence in the public. And the third question is a great one, because it really talks to getting into some kind of a cycle. So knowing that school construction is typically aided on a 20-year basis and mortgaged on a 20-year basis, what is typical is to see a school district that does projects every 10 years. So you're retiring one project and then starting another project, and you've got two different 20-year cycles going on simultaneously. So then the board thinks in the board thinks in decades. So if your stuff is going to last another decade, then it doesn't need to be in this decade's list of projects. It can be in the next decade's list of projects. So Syosset unfortunately went some 20 years without doing any kind of major projects. And so we're a little bit behind. And so if you, as a board, decide that you want to get on something like a 10-year cycle, then you'd say, what are the things that you have to address in this current decade? And then what are the things that will last until the next decade starts? And that's when you do it. But really that is a question for the board, because the economics of how schools are financed means that whatever pattern you set will be something that a future board inherits. I'm not saying any of you are off the board. I'm just saying like in some point in the future, because in order to keep the tax levy level, it's optimal to do new construction when you retire a debt. So we talk about these roll-offs. So it's optimal to have your kids on a 4-year spacing, because as one graduates from college and you lose that tuition payment, the next one comes in as a freshman, but you're not paying for two at the same time. So if you, as a board, get to a place where you're on a 10-year cycle, it will drive the future to be on a 10-year cycle, because as debt retires, that's when you'll want to take on new debt. So I'm not trying to fail to answer the question. I'm saying it's the perfect question, and the board has to decide what are you on a 6-year cycle? Are you on a 10-year cycle? Are you on a 20-year cycle?
Ms. Koshia?
Just two things. The first thing is, what would be helpful for me, and I don't know how the rest of the board feels, what would be helpful to see at the next meeting would be to break down the portable replacements with the 4 schools. Within those 4 schools, can you give us a number of what that replacement would be of the classrooms needed +1, what it would be the classrooms +3, let's say, and then with that, next to it, what it would be if we did the basic, how much that would be for classrooms +1, classrooms +3. I just use that number. And then what would it be for bells and whistles? I use bells and whistles just as the Chanel of classrooms. I don't know how else to say it. Classrooms +1, classrooms +3, because I think it would it would just help break it down to some degree, because the schools will need, those 4 schools need something different. Obviously, Berry Hill's number, I'm just going to assume, is going to be higher probably than the other buildings, just because of the way the facility is shaped. That would be helpful for me. I don't know how anybody else feels on that. And then my other thing is the Woodbury School rehab could theoretically be done any time of the year, in my opinion. Would we be saving, I'll send the question to you guys. Do you think we'd be saving any money by having the construction done not in the summer with Woodbury School? Since I think that most of the construction companies know that summertime is the optimal time for districts. Would there be any cost savings in being able to rehab Woodbury School, not in the summer and over the course of a year or 2 years, however, but not during summer?
The benefit you have with, let's just call it a blank slate in the sense of there's no noise disturbance to the classrooms. They pretty much have carte blanche to operate how they want to operate. There is a benefit to that. I would say I would have to refer to Elite. I would imagine there'd be some kind of cost savings to that because they don't have any schedule conflicts in the sense of they have to work around things and they can kind of operate as they want to operate as most efficiently. So I think that is a benefit because they can operate throughout the year without any impact.
Thank you. And just,
I'm sorry, does anyone from Elite want to just take a stab at that? Do you think we'll get Mike or members of the team?
Good evening. As far as the cost savings, I think it would be beneficial, be able to start off anytime during the course of the year. One of the things that you want to be able to do is bid out your projects, usually towards the end of the year or the beginning of the first quarter. So people can line up their work for the summer and everything else if they're going to implement during the course of summer. So the bidding time period when you're looking at bidding a project is key as far as having the market. And that's something as was pointed out by the H2M team is something that can be done anytime during the course of the year, which would be beneficial.
Mr. Rotolo?
Thank you. Dr. Rogers, these 5 classrooms at the high school, is this ones that we're talking about behind the main entrance in that courtyard?
No, so we proposed 2 different ways of approaching 5 classrooms. One was just to build 5 classrooms inside the existing courtyard. And that's something that would have to be contracted out. The other was to build a new library and take the existing library and convert it back to classrooms. So the classroom conversion is something that we could do in-house. And the only thing we would have to contract out is the library. The cost of constructing the 5 classrooms with no library was $10 million. The cost of constructing 5 classrooms with a library was 11. So, and of that 11, we think we could probably do $1 million worth of the classroom conversion as self-construct. So you're essentially looking at the same $10 million worth of borrowing either way. And in one, you get a new library, and in the other, you don't get anything. So it seems to me like the better way to spend the district's money.
And then when we're talking about the
So that's not included in that number. We're working right now on trying to fix the testing portable at the high school. We had to take it offline because it had some roof issues, but that's not part of that number at this time.
Okay.
We talked with you a while ago about cafeterias and kitchens, and we gave you a ballpark number for what it would cost to build kitchens, but there's not enough room inside the existing building envelope at any of the elementary schools to do that. So you would have to build out from the building. You'd have to build new buildings. And I don't remember the number that we gave you off the top of my head. Maybe Kevin or Megan remembers that number, but I didn't, this is going to be terrible. Just go with it. I didn't sense an appetite for that from the board. So we didn't flesh it out anymore, but Kevin or Megan, do you remember that number off the top of your head?
I want to say it's like in the 8 and 9 million range for all the elementary schools. Correct.
Okay, Dr. Park? Since the construction time is of an essence an issue, and it's very constrained, is it possible for us to even consider consolidating the vacations in February and April and give them a longer time to do the construction? Is that something that is even feasible? Oh, no.
I would love that so I can be away for 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, but unfortunately, I don't think we can do that because of all the different holidays and yeah.
So this is kind of piggybacking on Shawnee's earlier point was if really all we're saving on the Berry Hill is the time, what would be the difference then if we just did the construction? I know you had said about moving around, but would that be the same cost if we just built it traditional construction at Berry Hill?
I would think that's something. Yeah, and Mike's agreeing with me, but we would say it's about the same cost. But again, it's more about the disruption to the operations of the school.
More of the,
You'll have construction ongoing for those 2 years.
Okay.
There'll be time periods where there'll be less construction, more construction. Obviously, there will be heavier construction in hopefully during the holidays, the vacations, summer, winter break, but it'll be kind of an ebb and a flow. And again, it does come with a bit of a premium in the sense that they have to work around the school schedule. So.
okay. Jack.
Okay, are we all good?
The one last thing is, could you and Dr. Rogers, Ms. Chang, give the board homework so that we can come to the board meeting next time with the things we need to decide in the order that we need to decide them to finally make this conversation approach an end? Because this was like a meandering hour-long conversation, and I feel like we didn't make it to any important breakthroughs or decisions. I want to do the homework at home to come ready next time so that we can actually get to the end of this.
Absolutely, we can do that. All right, so are we all good? Any more questions? Oh, good, right, okay, so. Okay. All right, so from what I'm hearing, and anybody can chime in, of course. Number one, for Dr. Rogers, and of course, the wish list is very long, and I would want to do everything possible, but I don't think that's practical. And then would you be able to give the board a sort of like a dollar amount so we have something to work with? And that's number one. And number two, I also hear from the board a lot that we want to preserve as much time as possible. So this one we can get started, without wasting another year. And I totally agree, with everyone, with some, not all, because not everyone expressed their opinions on this. And then this way, so would you be able to give us a estimated time when we have to get that vote into, let's say, start the summer of 2025? I think that's very important. If we don't do it next May, when we should do it, this way we have a timeline to work with, and we know how we have to, whether we need to speed up or we have more time for discussion. Thank you.
So I don't want to give you that off the top of my head. I'd like to do some work with the team and come up with a better date for you, but I certainly take the 2 missions, the suggestion about the homework assignment, and we have another meeting, so I'll bring that back to you then.
All right, so now moving on to Board of Education update and such other items as may be appropriate. The board attended additional PTA meetings, the meet and greet with the PTA leadership, and the Nassau Suffolk School Board Association resolution dinner. Does anyone want to speak about any of these events?
Dr. Rogers, I've asked this question before, but you know also how important it is to me to make sure our buildings are welcoming. And I just, in my opinion, one of the things that keeps a building welcoming is having parent access to the schools. So like I asked you last year, I want to get a feel for where we are since pre-COVID. Are we back to where we were pre-COVID? And, you know, I'm just thinking about things like curriculum celebrations and PTA book fairs where parents can come and shop.
We are back to where we were pre-COVID. And one of the things that the elementary principals are all working on right now with Dr. Curry's assistance is there's often comparison between the various schools in the district. And so what they've done is they've created a chart so they can each see what the other is doing and try to harmonize their practices so that not just the kids all get a similar experience across the district, but the parents get a similar experience across the district as well. Not so much so that each building loses their own flavor of celebrations that they do or the times of years that they do it, but to make sure that there are multicultural celebrations in every building. They all look a little different in each of the buildings, but everybody has one. So it's that sort of thing. Each building has the opportunity to approach things in somewhat different ways, but everybody is trying to do similar things in each of the buildings. But yes, the curriculum celebrations are back. The book fairs are back. I can probably go to that chart and compile a list for the board at some point and share that with you, maybe at a future meeting if you think that'd be useful. Yes. Okay.
Okay, there are no legislative items and we're moving on to audience to the public. Some rules to follow that you must be a resident in order to come to the podium and address the board. We ask that you state your name and there's a log book at the podium. Please put your name and address and when you come up. In addition, you have 4 minutes to speak initially. At the end of the 4 minutes, I will ask you to take the seat first. After everyone in the audience has a chance to speak once, you may come up with a second time again. We don't allow the speaking of a particular staff or student issues due to privacy law. There's no polling of board members by speakers. We thank you for respecting the rule and procedures. With that, if anyone wishes to come up to the podium, please come up.
I'll log my name. My name's Austin Fang. I live at 14 Windermere Way in Woodbury. I think my legs fell asleep. Members of the board, Dr. Rogers, Dr. Curry, good evening. Thank you for devoting your time and your service to our community. My name is Austin Fang. I live at 14 Windermere Way in Woodbury. My wife Joanne and I have 4 children, 3 boys and a little girl. 2 are currently in Walt Whitman in 4th grade and 2nd grade. It's hard to be eloquent and to speak concisely at these meetings, but I'll try to do my best at both. I'm a founding member of a new nonprofit organization for youth athletics. I'd like to first speak about my motivation for helping found a 501c3 organization. It's really because times have changed. I grew up in Limbrook on the South Shore. My childhood consisted of playing outside with my friends, not being afraid to do well academically, and generally staying mentally and physically healthy. I was very lucky that I had access to local school playgrounds and school resources. They served as important foundation for the successes I enjoyed later. I was able to utilize outdoor playgrounds, indoor gymnasiums, music practice rooms, science laboratories, and so on. I fervently believe that those incremental small things that set me on a path that allowed me to graduate from Cornell University with a bachelor's, 2 masters, and a PhD in both mechanical and aerospace engineering. More importantly, having that foundation engendered confidence in my interactions with peers, allowed me to blossom as a leader, and granted me a 10-year career in aerospace before I branched out to start my own businesses. Nowadays, it's increasingly difficult to see kids playing outside until the sun goes down. Many are at home playing on their iPads or watching TV. I believe kids need to be with their peers, and one healthy outlet is for them to learn to play sports together. We created our organization to give back to this community and to teach the kids values of the Syosset Central School District through youth athletics. Now for the not so easy part. Starting this organization was much more difficult than any of us expected.
We were reminded of the importance of patience and humility. This is partly because we didn't have experience starting a nonprofit, but also because we've been met with significant challenges when communicating our needs with the school district. We felt that the barrier to entry for starting a new organization that aims to have a positive effect on our community is set too high. Speaking here tonight, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and patience of Dr. Curry. Right before tonight's meeting, we received an email that thoughtfully answered many of our questions. It's easy to overlook that allocation of resources equitably on a district-wide scale is indeed very difficult, and I want to publicly thank her for her help in explaining and unveiling a previously non-transparent process. We are committed to being a partner in our community rather than a splinter. It's also appropriate to suggest that assessing accurately the demands for resources and holding organizations accountable for reporting truthful numbers is the only way we can ensure that this process is fair. We thank the district for the proactive policy of requiring sign-in sheets to justify facility usage. We'd like to see accountabilities for groups that do not respect this new policy going forward. In speaking with the custodial staff at the elementary schools, it is a fact that empty gyms are a normal occurrence. To me, that's just a shame. It's a lost opportunity for all the positives I brought up before. Currently, we have hundreds of students who have registered with our clinics. These are students in our community who want to be a part of a group to meet new friends, learn from professional coaches, and just have fun. We're devoting our own time and money, and yes, we had to scramble to pay a bunch more for an outside gym at the last minute in order to offer this program. The result has been nothing short of heartwarming. We received gratitude of so many parents of children who felt that existing programs didn't answer their needs. Parents are asking how they can help. High school students are volunteering their precious times to teach. The smiles on their faces can be witnessed by anyone who follows us.
Mr. Finn, your time is up. The 4 minutes is up. I'm sorry.
I have one more paragraph. Thank you. The smiles on the faces can be witnessed by anyone who follows our social media accounts on Facebook and Instagram. I'm extremely proud of our board and what we've been able to accomplish in a short period of time. After the fall, we'd love to continue offering clinics and travel leagues for winter. We hope to be able to communicate the needs of our organization clearly to the district. We hope the district reconsiders the allocation of resources to adopt a fair, accountable process that is transparent and traceable. Thank you so much for listening to a resident who decided to do something rather than stand idly by. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for audience to public?
Hi, my name is Joshua Ma. I'm a high school student, SASA high school student, and I live on 55 Florence Drive. My question was, for the pre-K program being run out of the Blueberry School, would students / young people be able to have, help volunteer? Just like in general, or through like an internship program or anything like that?
You can take a seat if you're done with your audience to public. Yeah.
Do you want to just let him know he will get in?
Okay. Well, I want to see. Anyone else for audience to public? Okay, this closes the audience to public.
Mr. Fang, Mr. Ma, I appreciate you staying so late. Mr. Fang, even though you went first, I'm going to answer our students' question first because I need to get you home and in bed. So a great idea if we were to start a pre-K program of our own to offer an internship. Unfortunately, it probably won't occur in a time frame that would be useful to you personally. But that said, if that is something that you're interested in pursuing, earlier this evening, you heard Ms. Wojcik as part of the presentation. I think she could probably connect you with some people that might be able to make an internship happen more quickly. So I'm going to make sure that one way or another, the two of you connect and you have that opportunity. And we'll definitely keep in mind the possibility of offering our young people here, as you probably know, at the high school, we currently have a program, child development program, where high school students get to do some lessons with preschool children at the high school. So I think that would be a natural outgrowth to work with whatever program we were to set up, if that's the direction that the board and district eventually go in. But I don't think you need to wait until then to find some opportunities, and we'll try to help you find those opportunities. Mr. Fang, thank you for your comments. And I want to try and put some context around the process that we went through. You used the word non-transparent. I would prefer to use the word non-existent. The process was non-existent because we have not in the past had so much pressure for the use of our facilities that we haven't been able to resolve it by having various organizations that want to use our facilities make some changes, and we've generally been able to accommodate all of the requests that we've had in the past. This year, we were confronted with a new condition, which was more requests for space than we had space to allocate. In the end, of the several large groups that were looking for space, everyone came up short from what they had hoped to have. And we used an allocation formula that in the end allocated space based on the reported number of participants that were going to be there. Certainly understanding that that reported number of participants was going to be something, if we were going to use it as a metric, we were going to have some way of ultimately justifying it in the future. We decided to institute the process of having some sort of a sign-in sheet for all of our facilities use. And frankly, it's probably a good idea for us to have a sign-in sheet for our facilities use so that in the event of an emergency, we know who the people are that are inside the building, even if it's not a school district function. I think it would be very useful for us and for first responders to know who's on premises. So that ends up, in my mind, being an improvement to process that was driven by this challenge that we've faced. That will allow us to see if the requests are being used, if the usage comports with what we were told we should anticipate. And if we need to make refinements in the future, we'll do that. It, I think, is unfortunate that we weren't able to move more quickly. First, you used the term the barrier of entry is too high. The district has been hearing that from organizations new and old. We've moved to a new insurance company. That insurance company has raised expectations for the level of insurance that partner organizations will have. That has been a challenge for our PTAs. Unfortunately, it's been a challenge for those who are using our facilities. All I would say is that we tried scrupulously to treat everybody identically. So that delayed the ability to offer approvals. But as soon as the various things on the checklist were cleared, the approvals were granted. I anticipate, therefore, that the next season will be a little more straightforward for a couple of reasons. One, the organizations now are familiar with what the insurance requirements are, and if you were able to secure the insurance once, presumably it'll be easier to do a second time. We'll have a sense of what the usage was through this fall period, and we'll be able to calibrate, I think, with a little bit more precision going forward. And lastly, now that we've gone through this once, we're happy to talk about the choices that we made to allocate that space, our attempts to be fair to everyone, our inability to accommodate every request from every user, but our effort to try and get close to that. And the athletic space in the district, as I mentioned in my presentation, is at a premium. We have grown, but our facilities have not grown with us, and that's just created a constraint. So I thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. We will, now that we've gone through this once, we will be better at it the second time around. And so hopefully that reduces the frustration for everybody who's trying to work with us. And I'll just, on behalf of everyone, on behalf of Dr. Curry, I'll thank you for complimenting her, but I'll also thank you for your patience with us as we work through this.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to this discussion items, and the first item on the discussion is the mascot selection process. SIASA is in the process of transitioning its mascot in compliance with the New York State regulations. The board had a chance to learn some of the processes used by other districts in their transitions. And the most common features are forming an advisory committee and have the committee making a recommendation to the board. The process would engage the community to seek and identify a set of values that represent the community. We will sought community feedback through surveys and or community forums. And I just want to open the floor up for anyone who wishes to talk about the selection process. So this way we can give the administration the next step in terms of what to do. Ms. Abramson?
I think the surveys are good and for the mascot process. I just had a question regarding the new lawsuits on the mascot and wondering if while we transition to the new mascot, if we could send a letter asking for a little more time on the name and if Brave would be an option given the outcome of the lawsuits, and if we could have more time from the state to see where things go.
So there are, to my understanding, 2 lawsuits out there filed by 3 school districts altogether that have challenged the state's authority to require school districts to retire Native American themed mascots. So the regulation is still in force, notwithstanding the lawsuits. So state adopts laws all the time, people sue, but the laws are in place until a judge says the law is no good. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. So the board has voted to retire the mascot. We're in compliance with the regulation that was adopted. There's no requirement that the board adopt a successor mascot or team name from the state. That's something that districts have been doing because sports teams tend to like to have identities, but it's certainly not a requirement. So if you chose as a board to delay this process until you saw how the lawsuits were resolved, that is a choice that you could make as a board. You wouldn't need the state education department's permission, for example, to do that. And then if we were to write the state now and ask them if this name or that name would be permissible, they would give us the same answer that they gave us in the spring, which is, these are our rules. No court has struck our rules down yet, therefore they're in force. And that's the answer we would get. But it's really a decision for the board if you wanted to not identify a new mascot at all, or at least not identify a new mascot right away.
Just, really, I understand the mascot, and I really just, my purpose in asking is that a lot of people have spoken about Brave as a derivative that has a different kind of meaning, and if that was something that could still be an option as a result of this. I think it was something to look at, but I don't, obviously, we did vote on it. Obviously, I'm on board with the vote. I just didn't know with the new things that came about, if there's anything that you can do to delay, because a lot of these things require money to change. And I don't like putting in some money into things that twice, so to speak.
So we have until the end of June 2025 before we have to remove things like signage and scoreboards, et cetera. So I think if we were to send that letter today, the state would probably say, we did give you time. We gave you until the end of the 24-25 school year. So maybe the time frame to have that conversation with the state, if the lawsuits are not resolved in the next, let's say, year, now we'll be halfway through that 24-25 school year. And if we felt we needed more time, either to retain a derivative of the Braves name, or to start a process because we chose to delay, then it wouldn't be possible and you wouldn't want to do a blank scoreboard, spend money on that and then turn around to a scoreboard with a flying hippopotamus on it. I'm choosing an absurd mascot just to make sure that I'm not, putting my finger on the scales anywhere. So, we wouldn't want to have the flying hippo and then not become the flying hippos permanently. So I certainly understand the point.
Ms. Falco?
So there's really no downside to us going forward with picking a new everything. I mean, either way, the imagery and the mascot itself, not the name, but the mascot itself will have to be changed and adjusted. It's just whether or not we are able to retain some form of the name Brave. So we would have to, under all circumstances, we're required to change the imagery. So we could, I'm just thinking that we could go ahead, pick new imagery that we would want, and then come up with a possibility for the name. And then in a year and a half, let's say March of 25, if the lawsuit's not resolved, figure out what we want to remove in terms of the name Brave or not, depending on where the lawsuit is. But we still have to have, we still can't, there'll be no circumstance that we're able to retain the Native American imagery. So we, no matter what, would have to move forward with picking new imagery anyway, unless we want to just not pick imagery. And secondly, I think whatever process we select, we just have to make sure that all people in the community who want to take part feel like they were able to be part in it, and that it's not only available to the same people who are involved in the same processes all the time, and that if that we open it up to the entire community is my only thing. That I think that we should make sure that we're broad in our inclusion of whoever wants to be invited and included in determining it.
Just seconding both of you actually, because of a lack of clarity on the word brave. And I agree with Lynn. It just wasn't clear cut, period. So imagery was pretty much obvious, but not in the word. And given the fact that there are 2 lawsuits now out there, I too would like to see the end result for those. In the meantime, if we have time to keep without the imagery, the word, and perhaps using, I don't know what's currently on the, is it an S for Syosset, right? S and Braves. Is that okay? I mean, it's fine to use it in that, the S with the Braves underneath. In the meantime, it's permissible, correct? Or or that has to be done with immediately. I'm just trying to understand the time frame, so we could start discussing the first item, which is advisory committee selection and everything. That's step 1, right?
Yeah. So the state did do a guidance memo that amplified and explained their regulation, and I believe in that guidance memo, it's now a little fuzzy from last spring, but I do believe that they used the word brave and indicated that it was not permitted. But I'll go dig the memo up for you and share it with you again by email. And I'm pretty confident that that was in there. Meaning that it's not possible to use brave or braves.
How about S with Syosset underneath as a placeholder in the meantime? Is that okay?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with the word Syosset. So we can use Syosset, Syo, any derivation of Syosset is fine.
And only because I agree with Susan. This really belongs to this community. The community has to own this. It's not up to 9 of us. We said it before and I say it now. Every member of this community has to be invited if they wish to do so to the table. So this process of starting with the advisory committee, we really need to think it through. Who are these people that are going to make all those decisions based on the feedback from the community? They will have to ultimately decide, right? So I don't know if you expecting, if we expected to figure out the criteria for this committee tonight and finalize that, or are we tonight, are we just setting a direction for the, for the selection, for the process of selecting the committee, or are we finalizing the committee and how it's going to be done, who's going to be on it? In other words, I'm unclear what we're trying to accomplish tonight with this.
So I thought our instructions were pretty clear. We're supposed to be giving suggestions about how to structure the committee specifically in terms of sort of 2 broad categories. I think one is values and platitudes, which we're giving in plenty right now, which is we want everyone to be involved. We want everyone to have a voice. We think the more people that participate in the decision making are better, that the name belongs to the community, et cetera, et cetera. But from a functional standpoint, I'll give you some specific recommendations about things that I think are important in terms of creating the committee. So number 1, I think the administration should delegate someone to be on the top of the committee. It should be in a shared decision-making team structure. I think it should consist of organizations of parents, students, alumni, and staff or faculty that should select their own people to put on that committee. I think the board, in my opinion, should not be involved until the end. I think that committee should create their own set of rules, criteria, surveys, et cetera, to come to their own conclusions. I think they should try and engage students as widely as possible, down to the elementary level, et cetera, but that's a point of view and not a requirement. But the key thing from my point of view is I'd like the school board to be focused on selecting organizations or approving organizations or having you send over lists of organizations that want to select membership. And we're going to count on you to create the size of this committee with the right number of people, whether it's 225 or 200, I don't know, because you're going to have to delegate someone to manage it. And I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Hold on. Ms. Koshia.
I definitely agree with the committee. I agree with what Jack said. I think maybe we need to look into outside groups such as the fire department, because the fire department is a big focal point of our community. Perhaps they have somebody who would want to sit on the committee as well, or we could ask them if they would like to. If they don't want to, that's fine too. Chamber of Commerce might be a place to reach out to because they are representational of the local businesses in the community. We could ask them if they want to be a part of it, just as a suggestion. The other part of this is having a committee, in my opinion, of 100, 200, 300 people is not going to be effective. I don't even know how you would organize that. However, sending out a mass email to, the local, whoever you have on our email lists with, as far as teachers and students and parents. And also I know we have emails of community members, but perhaps on our website, we can get out, either an email where people could email in or some kind of, what we did for the start time, like some kind of poll online in a way. I know some of the other school districts upstate, Dr. Rogers, you had sent us a couple of examples of school districts that had sent out these polls with ideas. So perhaps we can widen the scope as opposed to having, to break down a couple hundred people into smaller groups. The other thing I'm just going to ask, only because it's very late and this is a very important topic for the community. At this point, I would just like to kind of leave it on you to see if you can come up with any more ideas of adding, and could we come back to this at a later point? Because we're not in a rush to do this tonight. And it would be really helpful to be in a little bit better, clearer, fresh state of mind if we can maybe postpone. Right now I know we're focusing facilities is like at the top of the list. So if we could just give us a little bit of time to kind of think more about this and maybe have something come back to us in December or whatever's good for you. Just my thought.
Dr. Park? I was gonna say what I thought about the committee, my ideas, but if we're going in that route and try to wrap this up tonight, do we have the additional session that maybe we can use, dedicate that time with just that?
We have a second meeting in October 18th.
So maybe we can do
Just
that,
2 weeks
right?
away. Yeah. Okay, all right. Okay.
Just one quick thing, because I'm all on board for wrapping this part up. What if you include in your weekly update, maybe, an email or a link where parents specifically can email in to say if they would like to be part of the committee or not, and then you could do some kind of lottery system if there's too many, just to, because I agree you can't have, 700 people on the committee, it's too much, but I think it should be equal opportunity. So, it doesn't have to be through your email or whatever, but just some way that, anybody who wants to say, I want in, can be, and then some fair way, whether it's a lottery or some other system that, everybody can have an equal opportunity to be on the committee.
Mr. Greco?
So I'm trying to digest this, and I think I hear two things. So the first is an idea of waiting for some period of time to allow some litigations to shake out, to see if the word brave could be something analyzed by this committee. And the second is, I don't think we're ready tonight to tell you exactly how we want this committee formed. And, I don't want to ask for more, Dr. Rogers, but I'm wondering if maybe more than describing what some other groups have done, maybe give us your feel for what could put together the most robust and far-reaching committee for this purpose. So we have something to really dig into the next time we meet, which I'm not sure when that's going to be, but those are my two takes. And I really like flying hippos. That's why I shouldn't be involved in making a decision.
They're fierce. They're fierce.
Ms. Abramson?
Sorry, I don't want to belabor anything, but just to be clear, while I do think that if brave is an option, I know that the community would appreciate it, because I think that they have expressed a desire to keep something that is the essence of what they felt Syosset was, and that was brave. So yes, that's that, but I don't want to not move forward, because I don't want to not be ready for wherever we have to go in the time period that the state has allowed us and been clear about, because they were clear, and where this goes, we have to be ready either way. So I don't want to keep waiting. I think we have to keep moving forward with the process, especially with the mascot, but be prepared to not to be prepared to watch and wait also.
Anyone else?
One quick thing. For something like this, we need to figure out how we reach every member of the community who is not on the email list, who is not part of the organization, part of the church, whatever it might be. Obviously, a mailer would be great, but I know it's cost prohibitive probably. So, my concern is that we're limiting this complex and important, undertaking people in the know, if you will, the school community, obviously, and organizations that are well-known in the community. Outside of that, people, and we keep talking about it actually quite frequently. The minute you're out of school, you don't get the emails. So how do we make sure that everyone inside in this community knows that this is being discussed and they're welcome to participate? That's my 5 cents for tonight.
As a side note, can the email be an opt-out as opposed to just getting dropped off? So that way people don't run into the problem that once your last child graduates, you're not in. Can it be opt-out versus opt-in?
I believe that's what it already is.
Okay. I'm hearing a lot of things for this discussion item, and it does sound to me that board members need a little more time. So the next meeting is October 18th, and we'll all go home and do a little more research, a little more homework, and then come prepare for the discussion at the 18th. Is that good with everyone? Okay. All right.
Mascot again on the 18th.
Yeah.
I don't think that's it.
Okay, all right. The next item on the discussion agenda is the NISBA resolutions. There are 56 proposed resolutions by the NISBA, and with the board typically support the decisions by the Nassau-Suffolk School Board Association because they're the local districts and they know what our needs are in this area. One of our board members attended the resolutions dinner just a few days ago, and there are several inconsistencies in the results of the dinner and also the Nassau School Board Association recommendations. If anyone wishes to talk or discuss about any of these resolutions, please do so. We need to give Mr. Greco, who is our voting delegate at the annual business meeting, the direction to vote. And if everyone is okay, he's going to vote under the recommendations of the Nassau-Suffolk School Board Association. Are we okay with that too? Or if anyone wishes to discuss any resolutions in particular, please feel free to.
Okay, so obviously I'm more than happy to vote the way you tell me to vote, and that would be what the Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association has recommended. But of course, for a few of these, they differ. So I need a little clarity on whether or which of the recommendations we would be following, whether it's the executive committee of the Nassau-Suffolk School Boards Association or the results of the resolution dinner. So that's one thing I'm going to need to know. And then there were two resolutions that jumped out at me. There were a lot, but it's late, so I'm going to limit it to the two that I noticed. One of them is number 39, which is actually not recommended by NISBA, not recommended by Nassau-Suffolk, and was not recommended at the dinner. But this is something submitted by the Newark School Board, which I believe is upstate, Dr. Rogers. And it talks about having NISBA lobby for requirements of board members to have a minimum number of hours of professional development, basically what we do already. And that jumped out at me. It's something that would be interesting to support that, because I actually think that is a good move. God knows I do a lot of continuing education in my profession, and I think it would be very helpful to all of us, not to mention I think we all do it already. And the second one that jumped out at me is number 53, which actually deals with the mascot issue, and the language. I'm not going to get into whether it's going in the direction of whether the state overreached, but I don't want to get into that. I just want to comment on the point that it talks about having, it's a resolution to have NISBA work together with affected school districts such as us and basically lobby for a modification of that policy. So where do you think my mind's going? It's going into who's going to pay for this. So I still don't understand how the state hasn't agreed to pay for something they forced on us. And in my opinion, they should. So I think NYSBA should be out there advocating for these affected school districts like us on that point, and just in general, the policy itself should have a little more reasonableness. We're still talking tonight about whether Brave is included in this policy. So I thought these would be the two that I think we should break from the second column, which is the executive committee's recommendations of the Nassau Suffolk School Boards Association.
Mr. Greco, regarding 39, I think it's going to be very difficult to put that in as a requirement. We as board members, we attend conferences, we attend law conferences, we would attend a lot of these meetings supported by NYSBA or sponsored by NYSBA, including the NYSBA podcasts too. And I know a lot of our board members, have listened to those podcasts too. To me, that's a way of development for professional development for board members. And I would prefer the board to be proactive in terms of finding time to do the professional development on their own rather than having a requirement to attend 6 hours a year. And that's just my recommendation, so anyone who wants to chime in, please feel free to do so. Ms. Evanson?
I agree, only, and also because the training originally that was supposed to be a certain number of hours was far more the hours than I originally anticipated. But I do appreciate that we continue to learn and grow as a board and learning more about different things, but I think we do it without requirement because that's the commitment we made to this role.
Ms. Dostrick?
So Brian, was it obvious or not obvious that the NYSBA workshops and podcasts and all the other things that we're talking about are counted under the professional development or not?
I think it's obvious that most of them would be deemed professional development, but we're talking about having NYSBA advocate to the legislature or to the government generally as to what would be those requirements.
Okay, so if the idea, and again, it's not clear from reading the resolution, but in principle, if all of these things that we're attending anyway count toward professional development or are likely to count toward professional development, I'm a believer that the more we practice, the better we're going to be. And so if NYSBA thinks that it should be mandatory that we practice to make ourselves better, I'll support that.
Let me be clear. NYSBA is actually opposing that resolution. NYSBA is saying that they do not recommend that they lobby to have the state enact some form of a regulation that would require school board members to have some level of knowledge and then continuing yearly training. So NYSBA is actually against it. I'm saying what my role is as delegate is for you guys to tell me whether I should be supporting or not supporting. And we can break from NYSBA. And in a lot of ways, we do break from NYSBA because we follow the Nassau Suffolk School Boards Association's recommendations, which in 5 or 6 examples break from NYSBA. So what I'm saying is we should be telling NYSBA they should lobby for the requirement. They're saying they don't want to.
And in this case, Nassau, Suffolk, and New York State are both saying no, but we're saying yes. Or what you're advocating is that we say yes. Okay.
Dr. Park?
I agree with Brian on this part. I think it's important for all the trustees to not just commit time, but to do the work, but also educate ourselves with all the detail that goes with it. And 6 hours actually is very small compared to a lot of the professional development that we do. The 6 hours seems to be very reasonable, and they should I think this will just be a sign to let people know who's working on the board that committing ourselves to advance and learn about the role is important. So I support this resolution too. And in terms of 53, with mascot imagery, I don't think this is representing what Brian is saying about the state paying for the changes that we must make. This has very different tone in the writing. So I don't know if I will support. I don't support or the resolution on this wording, and it's too late to modify. Ms. Alcove?
Yeah, I agree with Shani on number 53. There's nothing in what it says that has anything to do with asking the state to pay for the changes, which I would be in support of. If there was a resolution that said we want to advocate for the state to pay for the changes, I would be totally in support of that. But there's nothing in this resolution that suggests that we're asking the state to pay for it. It has nothing to do with the monetary aspect of it. You said it's too late to change. There's no more modifications that are able to be made, so it's as is.
We can still do amendments all the way up until, I have the date here. October 12th.
No, even that, in my opinion, doesn't. If you wanted to put some kind of modification in that says we would like to advocate for the state to pay for the changes or help offset the cost of the changes that are required, I would be on board with that. But I, as is, totally agree with Shani and would not be in favor of how it says as is. I would agree that we would oppose what it says as is.
Okay, let me clarify what the resolution says. It's that that NYSBA will work together with the affected school districts. So that's us and others. Forget about the word rescind, to modify the policy. So I'm reading it. So I just said, I'm ignoring the word rescind, whether we amend it out, but that's not the purpose of why I would support it. The purpose why I would support it is because it's talking about not New York State School Boards Association lobbying them to do something. It's working with us. So they would be working with us and we would say, you know what? They should modify it to include a payment system. They should modify it to make clear what names we can use. That's the sole reason I was presenting this.
So I fully support adding something in about asking them to help support them to fund it. But I think if we were going to support that, it would have to be very clear and we would have to ask for an amendment that specifically states so that the New York State School Boards Association work together with affected school districts and others to get this state to help fund the required changes that need to be made by the policy.
Dr. Park?
I think it will not be too late for us to actually suggest a completely new resolution for next year and specify the financial support to make those changes. And I think that will separate this to the connotation that was written in this one and the communication that happened at the dinner is completely different. So I think we need to separate our issue, which is financial, and the state to pay for those changes. I think that needs to be independent.
I agree with Johnny.
Mr. Rotolo?
What the state is committed to is they're going to remove the minimum payment requirement for building aid. So right now, there is a minimum expenditure of $10,000 before something will be aidable. So they said, look, even if the expenditure is $5,000, we'll make it aidable. So our building aid ratio, as we talked about earlier, is 42%. So it means that on an aidable expense, we might get 42% back. My impression was that the state was planning on being generous about how they interpreted what was aidable. So to my knowledge, no school district has tested that yet. So clearly we won't be first. So as others go through this process, I will report back how generous the state is with them.
All right, anyone else? All right, look. All right, it's past 11. So I do need consensus from the board for resolution number 39. So this way, Mr. Greco knows how to vote. So for number 39, those who wish to have NISBA, lobbying to the state about that 6-hour requirement, those who are in favor, just. Okay, all right. 4. And then those, who would like to just do it on our own when we have time and then continue to grow professionally. Well, I mean. All right, so it looks like Mr. Greco, that's what we're gonna do.
To be clear, we are not supporting.
Not supporting. No. All right, and number 53. We need to give Mr. Greco a clear direction in terms of how to vote as well. Number 50.
Well.
Yeah.
I think especially at the Johnny School.
All right. Okay, so we're gonna vote 53.
We're gonna follow the middle column.
Yeah, we're gonna follow the middle column. What's the executive committee? Yeah, Mr. Falco?
So we're gonna vote to oppose 53. But when do we have to put together the funding? So we'll do it and we'll put it in for the fund because we're not paying for it anyway
And
until next year. So
And typically, we can put in our submit our resolutions around July. There's a deadline sometime in July, so we will keep in mind to do that.
I was gonna say, who's gonna remind?
I will.
I propose and nominate Shawnee Park.
Do we want to put a resolution for this year or next year? Yeah, looks like next year.
There's no reason to rush to do it now, right? There's only, so then we could just have time and figure it out. So, I mean, for me, next year's okay.
So, Mr. Greco, I believe we have given you clear direction on how to vote. Okay, thank you.
So Brian's following everything. So we don't have the columns on the sheet. I know the columns are on the other one. Oh, it's in the first page. Is it here? Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, I didn't print this. I looked at it at my house.
Okay,
This wasn't printed.
all right, so are we good with this one? The
So what is
second
our,
resolution?
wait, I'm just, hold on.
So we're gonna move on to the next discussion item. You have questions?
Wait, can you just give me 1 second? Because I didn't know which one we're following, so I just need 1 minute. I just want to look at something. I just want to clarify on number 50. On number 50, Brian's going to support we're supporting any opposition to any legislation or regulation mandating comprehensive K-12 gender and sexuality education. So that's, we're supporting that. Or we're not supporting it, not recommended. So we're following the call, not supporting it. Okay, fine. Okay. Sorry.
Resolution, that's resolution.
We're
55.
following the executive
The
committee,
Executive committee, yes.
so not supporting.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay.
not
Are we,
recommended.
are we all good?
Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
All right, thank you. So the next item is the NISBA area director vacancy. So the current NISBA area 11 director, Mr. Sean, has been the director since 2016. And he decided not to run for another 2-year term on the NISBA board of directors. The term for the new area 11 director runs from January 2024 through December 31st, 2025. The Syosset board has received information regarding the candidates. And are there any questions from the board for these candidates, about the candidates? No? So can I get a nomination for, okay, Dr. Park?
I nominate Charmise Desiree.
Okay,
She's been serving actively in Nassau Suffolk County, Nassau Suffolk SBA, and also she is the chairperson for the NISBA committee, resolution committee.
are there any other nominations? Okay, so I'll second it by Ms. Levitan. Okay. All right, so the resolution to cast Syosset's role for Ms. Charmise Desiree to the position of Area 11 Director. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so it's going to be Charmise Desiree. Thank you. Okay, there's no unfinished business. The following is new business. A items. A1 is the approval of the appointment of staff changes. Can I have a motion, please? Dr. Park, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A3 is the approval of stipends and hourly rates for 2023, 2024. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A4 is the approval of coaching recommendations, winter 2023, 2024. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A5 is the approval of the appointment of interim science coordinator, Adrian Ropfond. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? A7 is the approval of appointment of interim district clerk, Teresa Scatoro. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Abramson. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. B items. B1 and B2 can be taken together. They are the approval of the committees on special education and preschool special education recommendations. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B3 is the approval of student club charters 2023, 2024. Can I have a motion, please? Dr. Park, second by Ms. Abramson. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? B4 is the approval of authorization for contracts for Federal Park Fund B. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Ms. Levitan. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C items. C1 is the approval of authorization for service contracts. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? Mr. Ostrich, please.
You all thought you were getting out of here. So the contract for the consultant to review our bid for outsourced lunch that's one of the contracts we're reviewing. So I don't so much have a question about the contract as much as I don't want to hold up the process of our walking forward to design our potential bid. But what I do want to do is raise my hand and say, I think we need to have a strategic level conversation about the idea of outsourcing our lunch. So outsourcing is a great thing. We do it all over the district all the time for all kinds of services that are provided. It saves us money. It eases the administration. Sometimes it leads to, inconvenience as part of the trade-off. But in this particular case, when we're talking about the health and wellness and the lunch and the food that we're putting in our kids, I think we got to take a step back and have a conversation about, number one, what are the other alternatives that are available to us? It cannot be that every district follows the same procedures for their lunch programs. I'd like us to have a discussion and a presentation about what it is that's available at other districts and the alternatives, because for me, this is something that doesn't feel like it's the kind of service that we want to put out to a for-profit corporation for bid if there's another alternative that seems reasonable. So that's the discussion I want to have at some point in the not too distant future. Does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
From Mr. Ostrich, from what I understand, the lunch options for us is very limited because elementary schools don't have kitchens. So a lot of the food choices they would have to made somewhere and deliver to elementary schools. So it's very limited menu options for that. And secondly, for these lunch providers, we have to follow very strict federal regulations in terms of providing food to the students. And I don't think we have a lot of choices for that either. And, Dr. Rogers, please chime in if you wish. And Mr. Greco, did you want to? Yeah. Okay.
So I don't disagree with what Mr. Ostrich's saying, but it's late and we're hearing about this for the first time. And I wonder if it's possible, Dr. Rogers, for you to just at some point in the future, give us what our options would be. If there really are no options, whether to do this in-house or to look to other providers, so be it. But I think what Mr. Ostrich's getting at is whether or not there are options, and only you can tell us that. And then if there are options, we should discuss it.
I agree with Jack on this because this has always been an issue that we want, healthier food or other options. So I agree with that. We should definitely discuss this.
Okay, C2 is the approval of authorization for the adoption.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Can I have a motion, please?
You have the motion, and this
I
second,
did.
you just need all in favor.
Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C2 is the approval of authorization for adoption of grant. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Dr. Park. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C3 is the approval for authorization for special education and or nursing contracts. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, seconded by Mr. Ostrich. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C4 is the approval of acceptance of donations. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Dr. Park. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C5 is the approval of acceptance of donation. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Greco, second by Ms. Falco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? C6 is the approval of the disposal of broken, surplus, and or obsolete equipment, supplies, and books. Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Rotolo, seconded by Ms. Koshia. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? May I have a motion to adjourn? Oh, Mr. Good.
I think at this point, let's talk about it when it gets put in.
You can leave it there. You kept me, I know.